All right, Jordan, as I'm sure everyone in the comment section knows, everybody with an internet connection knows, everybody who cares anything about college football knows that the ACC, Clemson, and Florida State came to an agreement. They settled this week, um, and all the lawsuits are going to be dropped moving forward by both the ACC, Clemson, and Florida State. So they've come to an unequal revenue sharing agreement. 40% of the TV revenue will be split evenly with ACC legacy teams. Clemson and Florida State, or really any ACC program, finally has a number of what it would actually cost to get out of the conference instead of these, speculative, the grant of rights is worth this and this formula and that formula. They finally have real numbers that are actual exit fees. The unequal revenue sharing is looking like if your team performs really well and your eyeballs are up to towards the top of the league, you could potentially those bigger brands in the ACC could potentially see themselves earning upwards of $15 to $20 million more than just the base revenue of the ACC where it currently stands. So that may put you somewhere in the $60 million range if you're Clemson. Obviously, if you were to make a playoff, that's $4 million, and each round that you advance after that is another $4 million to your school and your school only, not to be divvied up between all of the other schools within the conference. So all the playoff money goes to you. So obviously, this has been a long time coming, right, Jordan? The offseason this time last year is when all these kind of lawsuits came out. And there was a lot of posturing back and forth, and Clemson filed in South Carolina, and then the ACC followed suit and filed in North Carolina, and there was just a lot of legal talk and posturing back and forth. And instead of the discovery phase actually going to court, I think most people who were listening to some of the legal experts when it come to this knew that it was going to ultimately end in some sort of settlement, right? And the day has come. It's finally settled. Your thoughts on the settlement from an ACC conference perspective, and then from a Clemson perspective, and then overall college football. What does it mean for all three of these, right? I know a lot of people online have been talking about this quite a bit, and some people are saying the ACC won. Some people are Florida State and Clemson won. At the end of the day, I think the whole point of mediation is you're obviously going to give up something. So each and every party gave up something. But overall, in my opinion, Clemson and Florida State came out ahead of the ACC on this. Obviously, the ACC, what win did they get? They get to keep the conference together as is for at least another 5 years, right? Until the next media rights deals are up with the two big conferences, at which point it would be less than $100 million for any ACC school to get out of the ACC. So that's significantly less than some of the $500 million numbers that were being thrown about this time last year. So, Jordan, your overall thoughts on this ACC settlement? What does it mean for Clemson? What does it mean for the conference and college football as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's massive for a lot of reasons. I think I agree with your assessment that I think ultimately Clemson and Florida State, came out the winners in this. But for the ACC as a conference, it means stability for at least another 5 years. You could say they're kicking the can down the road, and you're probably right. But it's something that they needed to do because I think there were some things that they didn't want to, they didn't want getting out if things got to the discovery phase of those trial, especially, how the Raycom deal was brokered and all of that. There was a lot of things that were alleged by Florida State and Clemson that were kind of out of contract in terms of how they how Jim Phillips and ACC leadership went about extending the option and all of that. So I think for the ACC, like I said, it means stability. It means you keep the conference together for at least a little bit longer. But I think ultimately the biggest brands in the ACC are the biggest winners. Clemson's, the Florida States, the North Carolinas, the Miamis. They're going to be the ones that ultimately win from this. Between the unequal revenue sharing and the brand initiative that they are talking about. So I mean, if you're bringing in the viewers, you're going to get a bigger piece of the pie. That ultimately is what's going to keep Clemson and Florida State and Miami and North Carolina. That's what's going to keep those schools competitive with the SEC and the Big Ten, because you were looking at potentially a $30 million plus deficit in comparison year to year. Now it's probably going to be closer to 10 to 15 million, if at least for the top teams in the conference. And that's nothing new, really. Clemson and Florida State especially have been able to mitigate those deficits for a long time. You were never at a point where you were making more than the SEC or making as much as the SEC, but that's a lot more tenable than the $30 million plus that SEC teams were going to have over you with the current structure. Well, the previous structure now, if that had stayed in place. So massive win for Clemson, Florida State. I think the biggest winner is the biggest winners are North Carolina and Miami, because they didn't have to pay the legal fees. But that ultimately it would Clemson and Florida State, they got what they wanted, because this was something that they had asked for a couple of years ago and were told no. So it just you're not leaving the conference, but ultimately the reason that they went in with the stated intention, at least Florida State did, the stated intention of leaving the conference, you were able to get it was kind of like going all in, so that when they met in the middle, you got what you actually desired. It's, one of the rules of mediation is like start with your highest, demands first and see what you can get out of that. And so that's ultimately what happened here. I think it's delaying the inevitable for the ACC, but it means no restructuring for at least a little bit, and it means Clemson and Florida State can make a fair share of their money based on the viewership and what they mean to the conference in terms of brand value. So big win for them, and obviously the losers in this, I think, are the lower schools in terms of brand, but they're losers and winners because they keep they have stability at least for a little while longer as well. But ultimately, now they're going to be making less money, but they agreed to it because ultimately they know that they're not going to be guaranteed a home if they can. If Clemson and Florida State were to leave the ACC and the conference were to break apart, there's just they want to stay a part of the quote unquote relevant. And I use that loosely because we're not talking, the ACC is not on the level of the SEC or the Big Ten in football, but, they still have a considerable seat at the table when it comes to the playoff and, power conference distinction is concerned. So that's important. And, but yeah, that's my long spiel. It's kind of, I think, like I said, I think the biggest brands in the ACC were the biggest winners from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that your biggest brands in the conference, your Clemson, your Florida State, your Miami, your North Carolina, schools like that are obviously the biggest winners. Obviously, this cost Clemson and Florida State quite a bit of money in legal fees and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I think both parties, both Clemson and Florida State, got what they wanted. You mentioned, no, they're not getting out of the conference right now. But honestly, at the end of the day, if you get out of the conference right now, really, where are you going to go? Is the SEC and the Big Ten really going to take you right now when there's no additional money that's going to come by adding you because they're already locked into their TV deals, right? It makes a lot more sense to free yourself up come 2029, 2030, when the Big Ten is renegotiating their TV deal, right, for possibly more money. And if they add additional schools, obviously that would probably generate more revenue, and those schools would be more apt to allow new members to those conferences, right? Will that happen? I don't know 100%, but there is a clear and distinct path now for any ACC school to leave the conference whenever they want to. They just have to pay the money. If they wanted to leave today, it'd be somewhere below the $200 million mark. I don't know the exact number, but it's somewhere below the $200 million mark, right? We talked about moving into 29 and 30, and then it's significantly reduced. So it's going to reduce year by year. By the time 2030 rolls around, it'll be below $100 million to leave the conference, which is a much more palatable number than $500 million, right? And if you are going to make $15 to $20 million more a year, assuming that you keep winning at a very high level, you keep competing at the top of the conference, you're going to get that $15 to $20 million bump, which essentially pays for your exit fee for getting out of the conference. If you do the math there, $15 million a year for every year up until the 2030 season, they essentially would pay you to leave the conference, and it would cost you nothing. So if you look at it that way, that's a win in my book. As far as who loses, I mean, the ACC does win in the fact that they keep the conference and its members as they currently stand together for another 5 years. But the writing's on the wall. The biggest brands in this conference are going to be looking to exit. And all it will take is an invite from another conference and some sort of landing spot, and come closer to that 2020, 2029, 2030, 2031, whatever it is, year range. They will absolutely drop that almost $100 million, whatever, to get out of the conference and join a conference that's going to pay them significantly more money. So unfortunately for the ACC and some of the smaller schools, it's definitely a loss in the fact that I think the writing's on the wall that all of your biggest brands are probably leaving somewhere between now and the 2030, the 2029 to 2031 seasons. So that's unfortunate. I've said many times on this channel that I am not the biggest fan of conference expansion. I wish the Pac-12 still existed. I wish Texas and Oklahoma were still in the Big 12. That's just how I preferred it, but that's not the way college football is going. So what it looks like in the future, no one really knows, but this is definitely a win for Florida State. This is definitely a win for Clemson, and some of the other bigger brands in the ACC, and it gives them a clear-cut path on how to get out of the conference. And it also incentivizes investing in your sports programs, investing in your football facilities, investing in your two big sports, which is basketball, men's basketball, and football. Because if you want to get that additional money that's going to be available, you have to invest, you have to win at a high level. So I think incentivizing that is a good thing. I know in a perfect world, we all just throw the money together evenly in a pot and we divvy it up. But that's just not the world we live in. It's not fair when schools like Clemson invest as much as they do into football and their sports programs, and you have other smaller or just schools that frankly just don't take sports seriously. And you can tell by their facilities, you can tell by the money that they put into it. So why should those two entities be making the same amount of money? It doesn't make sense. So glad that that's fixed. I love the path that they have to an additional $15 to $20 million in revenue. I think that's good. And then you can even further close that gap by having a good playoff run. As I mentioned, you make the playoffs, that's $4 million in your school's pocket. You don't have to share it with anyone. You advance another round, that's another $4 million in your school's athletic fund that you don't have to share with anyone else, so on and so forth as you go deeper into the playoff and make a run. So the money's out there to be made. Now you just got to go out there and take care of business on the football field.
Yep, absolutely. And it's big for just the future of Clemson and how they're going to stay competitive. And and like you said, I mean, it's good to have a number now, and the fact that you have a number that's greatly reduced from what was initially thrown out there, during especially during the proceedings of all of this, the path is very clear. If Clemson ultimately chooses to lead the conference, so big win. It's not the bombshell that everyone maybe expected when those lawsuits were first filed. Clemson and Florida State, they're out of the ACC by 2026, 27, or whatever. But it does mean that there is a path forward for the biggest brands in the ACC to continue to maximize their ability to compete in the sport of football, especially.